Hi, I'm Barry Gilreath, the evangelist for the Highland Church of Christ in Dalton, Georgia. Thanking you for being with us today for the Fabric of Family. We appreciate all of our viewers who watch on a regular basis, who have interest in strengthening the home and learning more about these various issues that are related to the home. If you are a first-time viewer today, we want to thank you for being with us, and we hope that the things we have prepared to discuss today will be of benefit to you. I'm confident they will. And to do that, to help me, assist me today, are two very special guests. Cliff Goodwin. Cliff, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I come from Talladega, Alabama, Barry, where I've been working for the last 10 or so years with the Ironton Church of Christ. My wife, Beth, and our children, we live in that community, and we're really enjoying the work there. And I personally want to thank you for having me with you here today.
Well, it's indeed my honor, and what a great benefit you are to this program when you're able to be with us. Now, something about you, Cliff, that perhaps we don't know.
Well, I love the outdoors. During the warm weather, I like to fish, and during the cold weather, I like to hunt. And those are probably at the forefront of my hobbies.
Good, wholesome hobbies to have.
Yes.
Absolutely. Also, we have with us Paul Sane.
Glad to be here, Barry, and thank you for having each of us on the program. I work with the East Hill Church in Pulaski, Tennessee. I'm in my 20th year there. My wife and I have enjoyed 4 children biologically, 5 children by way of foster care, now have 7 grandchildren, but that still doesn't make an expert out of us. We're still growing and we're still learning, but it's a delight to address these problems that oftentimes are faced by home, rearing of children and so forth, that is so needed.
And we appreciate you being with us, Paul, and I know you have a interesting hobby that you enjoy as well. What is that?
I love old cars. I have piddled around with cars and the restoration of cars for some time, and have my 7th 57 Chevrolet in the garage right now, still working on it, trying to bring it back to its original state.
You know, sometimes people in the world perhaps will look at a Christian and think, well, you know, a Christian just can't have any fun. Mm-hmm. But that's not true,
That's not true.
No. We're talking about some very important subject matter today. We've discussed this in part on other programs, but we want to look at some ways that young people get hurt. And, of course, the purpose of this is so we can identify these ways and then better educate ourselves about what we can do about it. So I want to turn to Cliff at this time. And Cliff, how about offering a suggestion there?
Well, as you mentioned on maybe an earlier broadcast, Barry, we dealt, as I recall, with alcohol and tobacco and illicit drugs. And certainly a number of young lives are damaged by those things, those substances. But something else that young people face repeatedly in our culture is they face pressure to be active sexually before marriage, of course. And I would like to say, as we begin maybe discussing that problem, the devil majors in a number of things, one of which maybe we haven't mentioned on prior episodes. He majors in taking something that is inherently good, wholesome,
right,
and in twisting it, abusing it, misusing it. And that is certainly what can be said of human sexuality in modern America, and probably, for that matter, probably in the modern world. We need to understand that God created sex. In fact, I heard one author or gospel preacher once say that sex has been termed God's wedding gift. And I think that's a very beautiful terminology. But the devil then comes along, and he tries to take human sexuality out of the realm for which God intended it, namely the realm of marriage. He moves it outside of that realm and then begins all manner of twisting and perverting it. And the result is lives are hurt. Lives are in many instances ruined. And of course, young people are not exempt from that problem.
Are young people sexually active today? I mean, is that, you think, really a problem that we're facing?
There's no doubt about it whatsoever. Statistically, we are told that the majority, before they reach mid-teen years, have been involved in some type of sexual activity. That staggers me. I recently had an opportunity of speaking at a commencement service from a middle school going to high school. There were a couple of hundred, I think 213 if I'm not mistaken, that were to graduate in that middle school. I was told after the service was concluded, 9 were pregnant. 9 of the girls expecting babies. And yet they seemed to almost glory in that. It was something like a scoring, something to be proud of. Not realizing the hurt and the damage and the loss in their life. It is a problem today. You know, I was thinking, Cliff, as you were speaking a moment ago, in the New Testament, in Romans 15, verse 4, when we read of the things that were written aforetime, written for our learning, and how we should be wise and able to learn from the stories, the accounts of things of the past, the Old Testament, and even the New Testament, mistakes that were made by so many, David and Bathsheba for an example, and be able to look at the devastating tragedy that existed from him looking, lusting, and then fulfilling that lust in the sexual act, that which he did not have right to.
And in that instance there also, it cost David so greatly. I mean, that whole problem with Bathsheba wound up ultimately costing David probably 4 of his sons.
Yes.
And all of the hurt, some of which it really comes out, for example, in Psalm 51, the great penitential psalm, wherein really David is pouring out his heart unto God in penitence, in genuine contrition and godly sorrow because of that sin with Bathsheba.
In fact, what he said was, I acknowledge my sin is ever before me. He just couldn't rid himself of that.
Cliff, what would you say if you were speaking with perhaps a young lady and she says, but Cliff, my boyfriend says if I love him, then I will be sexually active with him?
Well, I might not say it this frankly, but my first impulse would be, well, you need another boyfriend. Once again, not only has human sexuality been skewed in our modern climate, but also the concept of love. And the biblical concept of love, Barry, is such that it seeks the greatest welfare of its object. You want what is truly best for the other person if you love that person. And a young man who truly loves a young lady, in the biblical and in the proper sense, he's not going to want to demean or degrade her by using her sexually. That's basically what it often amounts to. And by not respecting her body, and certainly by not respecting and being concerned about her soul. And that's one thing about all sin, not only sexual sin, but all sin affects the soul. And so I would try to counsel that young lady that that young man whom she is dating, Barry, he does not love her at all, at least not in the proper senses, if he would tempt her and seduce her and degrade her in that manner.
You know, I enjoy teaching sometimes when I'm with young people, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. You brought up the subject of love, and there are really a lot of distortions today about what love is. And sometimes young people think to themselves, well, I love this boy or I love this girl. But listen, if you truly love someone, you need to go over and read 1 Corinthians 13 and see the qualities that are given there of what real love is all about. And you know, I read in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, speaking of that real love, that it doth not behave itself unseemly. That is, it doesn't respond in an unseemly way, in an inappropriate way, and it says, seeketh not her own. It's not selfish. It's not focused on my gratification. It's focused, as you said, on what is in the best interest of the other person.
Absolutely.
A story is told about a teacher that had a group of boys together, and there was 12 of the boys, and each of them had girlfriends, and the teacher had a big bouquet of red roses, 13 of them, 12 students. He took one of the roses and mangled it, just kind of halfway wadded it up, put it back in the vase, passed it around, asked each of the boys to take one. Which one was left over? Obviously the mangled one. And he went further to teach the point, when it comes time in your life to select a mate, to select someone that you want to be your partner for the rest of your life, you don't want a mangled or tarnished mate. One that has been promiscuous with others as far as in a sexual way.
And these are things we need to be teaching in the home as parents. Sometimes we look at the church and we say, well, it's the church's responsibility to teach my young people these things. No, it's my responsibility as a parent. The church can supplement that, the church can assist in that, but the responsibility is mine as a parent. So I want us, in the time that we have remaining today, to maybe think about some practical suggestions that we could offer to those who are watching the program today to help them to have the godly home that God would have them to have.
There's so many different suggestions that we might offer. Probably time will not allow us to look at them in detail. But the first one that comes to my mind would be, we need to recognize the enemy. We need to understand that he's a vicious, he's a roaring lion, he's walking about just like a lion might in preparation to pounce on a little lamb and completely devour. That's exactly the terms that Simon Peter used in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8. And he wants us to be destroyed. He wants us to burn in hell forever. Whatever way he can do that, he's going to strive diligently and passionately to accomplish that. So the enemy of the home and the ways in which he's going to try to attack us, we need to understand, especially as parents and especially as spouses, our spouse, our relationship with each other, as well as parent to children, to recognize the enemy.
Cliff?
I think that's exactly on target. The devil does not want us to enjoy life the way that it really can be enjoyed. God's pattern for living life is always the best.
Yeah.
And if I could get one message across both to parents, but also maybe especially to young people, is that you do not know how good life can be. And I'm talking about this life. I'm not even thinking at this point about heaven after a while. But you do not know how good life can be until you live it God's way. And that means following God's pattern in all these areas. Not only sexuality, but following God's pattern in general. And the devil, he would rob everyone he possibly could of that knowledge and of that benefit.
But Cliff, Christians, they don't have any fun. They, they just sit around and just live boring lives, don't they?
Well, that's the misconception, Barry. But I tell you what, you talk to some especially who have been on both sides of the fence. Some perhaps unlike myself. I was reared around the Lord's people all of my life, but many have not had that privilege.
Sure.
And those who have been on both sides of the fence will be quick to tell you that they really had not begun living until they had begun living the Christian life. It's only logical, Barry. The one who would know most about man and the one who would know most about man's happiness and man's fulfillment would have to be the one who created man. And I think Solomon knew that when he wrote Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. That's what man is about, is to fear God and live a life that honors and keeps His commandments.
And Jesus said, I am come to give you life and to give you life more abundantly.
Absolutely.
So we need to know the enemy if we're going to have a godly home. Well, our time's quickly getting away. We've got about 5 minutes. What's another?
We need to counterbalance evil too. The thought of parents being willing to say, okay, here is the enemy. Here's the attacks that are going to be made on my home. Here's the world in which we live, and there's no purging of all evil out of our lives, but we can counterbalance it. What I mean by that is teaching against it, training our children to recognize it, to understand that it can hurt you, to help them to see that God's people and to please God and that which is good for us is not right. Let me illustrate it. Not to turn television off, but when something comes on television, not to just react in such a wild, heinous way, but to methodically, to very tactfully, to say, we must not talk that way. God's people, and God doesn't want them to do that. You know, husbands and wives don't act that way. Whatever the particular incident is that is taking place, to counter it, to help in even the small children, to put into their minds that this is holy, this is good, that is not holy, and that is not good.
Isn't that what the Old Testament taught the Jews as they were with their children when they rise up?
That's right.
When they lay down, when they go along the way, the path, they're to teach their children. And we as parents can use these things that are negative, really, in a lot of ways, but as a way to teach our children of what is right. That's an excellent observation.
It's interesting to notice in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 11, but also chapter 6 previous to it, both times the admonition is teach your children the statutes and commandments of God. Then we can add an additional quick reference to Eli and how he failed to teach his children, to reprimand them or to bring them back into the way of righteousness, and as a result they suffered greatly.
All right, so we're to know the enemy, counterbalance the enemy or the evil, and then what else?
I would suggest spirituality and growing, developing, helping us to be a godly home, the teaching of our children at nighttime, to get on their knees or to bow with you in prayer before they close the day, to have a Bible story, to have a memory verse, a verse every week or a verse every month or something of that nature, to help teach them and to let them see God in our lives, which will then help them to recognize, to purge out that which is of the devil, our enemy. Counterbalancing the evil, we're substituting something that is wholesome and good in their life as well.
You know, Barry, there are a number of foods that will nourish, sustain, and even grow the human body, the physical body. But there is but one food that will nourish a person's spirit, that will grow a person spiritually, as it were, from the inside out. And that's the Word of God. Jesus said in Matthew 4, He said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. I'm convinced personally, Barry, that so many of the problems and heartaches that our families face today could be to a large extent, if not altogether, avoided if we were to spend more time together as families in God's Word.
Absolutely. So we need to know the enemy, counterbalance the evil, teach children about God and His Word. We got about a minute left. Any others?
One last summation would maybe be never give up.
Never give up.
Keep on going. Abraham, in God's sight, was one that was going to command his children. What a compliment. But we can also notice how Noah, in a world of wickedness, was righteous and raised righteous boys. We should not give up. The world is around us. Satan's the enemy, and he's going to bombard us, and he'll never give up 24/7. But we must also be vigilant, and we can be victorious. We can have a godly home.
Wonderful, wonderful discussion today. I want to thank you for being with us. And we want to thank you especially for being with us today. And we're encouraging you as parents, grandparents, young people, never, ever give up. Fight the good fight of faith. And one day you can have a home with God in heaven forevermore.
Let's make the most of a minute. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, on an expedition at the South Pole, lost his way in a sudden blizzard. He was hopelessly lost. There was nothing to give him any sense of direction. Now, here's what he did. He took his long pole and stuck it in the snow, tied a scarf to it. Now that was his center. If he failed to find the right way, he would return to his center and try again. Listen, Jesus Christ is our center. He's the only man who ever lived a sinless life. Philippians 1 verse 21 says this, "For me to live is Christ." If we're wise, our life will revolve around what this Master would have us to be. Question, have you adopted this center of reference in your life? John 14 and verse 6, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father but by me." I'm Glenn Colley from the Church of Christ, hoping you make the most of your minutes.
Speech on. Brightness. Screen mirroring. Bright. Volume. Selected. Screen record.